Psachim Perek Vav Mishnah Aleph Elu Dvarim BaPesach Shedoichin Es HaShabbos. We learned in the previous parak that the Korban Pesach was brought Erev Pesach even when it fell out on Shabbos. However, the parts of the avodah that can be done before or after Shabbos may not be done on Shabbos. So Elu Dvarim BaPesach Doichin Es HaShabbos. These are the things in the avodah of the Korban Pesach that are override the Isurei Shabbos. Shchitasai shechting it. Even though these things involve activities usually forbidden on Shabbos, they are mutter for the Korban Pesach, or they were nidche because of the Korban Pesach. Chachamim learn from a pasuk Gzeir Shava between the Tamid and the Korban Pesach that just as bringing the Tamid they bring it on Shabbos, so too do we bring the Korban Pesach and it overrides the Hilchos Shabbos. So shchitasai uzrikas damai. The shchita shechting on Shabbos is a malacha. The Pesach must be shechted and its blood thrown on the mizbech on Erev Pesach. And these malachas are therefore done at the time, even when it is Shabbos. Michui kravav, cleaning its intestines from waste matter. The intestines which are eaten along with the meat of the carbon are punctured, and the waste matter is removed from them. Even though cleaning the intestines is not part of the avodah of the carbon, it's done on Shabbos because the intestines will become ruined from the waste that's inside if it remains in them until nightfall. Burning the fats and the organs on the mizbeach. Although the carbon and the emurim may be burnt after Shabbos, they're burnt on Shabbos itself because it's preferable to burn the parts right after the carbon is shechted. It's so important to do a mitzvah at the preferred time that we are willing to be doicha Shabbos to do so. Since Erev Pesach is the designated time to do these things, they are done in Erev Pesach even when it's Shabbos. However, roasting it and rinsing the intestines to clean them thoroughly do not override the Hilchos Shabbos because they can be done after Shabbos ends. Meaning, we mentioned before that the waste has to be removed from the intestines. The intestines must be rinsed to remove any waste matter still sticking to them, so it needs to be scrubbed down well. This can be done after Shabbos ends because a small amount of waste matter will not cause the intestines to spoil, even if they're not rinsed until nightfall. Carrying the carbon through Rosh Hashanah to the Beis Hamikdash or bringing it out of the Tchum Shabbos. Or cutting off a wart to make it fit to be a carbon. A wart is a mum that passes an animal from being brought as a carbon. Once the wart is removed, the animal may be used. So our kavasay havasay b'chutz tchum ein doichin es Shabbos. Rabbi Lezer ein doichin. The chatirasay abelas does not override Shabbos. Since these preparations can be done before Shabbos, they may not be done on Shabbos. Rabbi Lezer ein doichin. Rabbi Lezer says that these activities also override the Isurei Shabbos. According to Rabbi Lezer, just as the avodah, the Korban Pesach, may be done on Shabbos, the hachana, the preparations for bringing the Korban Pesach, may also be done on Shabbos, even though they could have been done before Shabbos. This is Rabbi Lezer l'shitasai, as we explained in Masechta Shabbos, Perek Yotes Mishnah Aleph, and the first Mishnah in Rabbi Lezer Demila, that Rabbi Lezer holds that you're allowed to cut down trees to make coal, to light a fire, to warm water for the baby who's having a bris. So that's very, very extended how far you could go to be able to be Mechal Shabbos, so to speak, to do a mitzvah that could be done on Shabbos. Because Rabbi Lezer holds, bottom line is, Rabbi Lezer holds that Machshirei mitzvah deichem es Shabbos, like we explained in Masechta Shabbos. Mishnah Beis, Rabbi Lezer, Aloi Dinhu, can it not be proven by the following logical argument that carrying a carbon through a public domain, or bringing it from out of the Tchum, or Chatirasei Abelas is permitted on Shabbos? Ma'im shchita shimishum malacha deichem es Shabbos. For if shechting a Korban Pesach, which is an act that involves a Isur D'Oraisa of Meleches Shabbos, is Doiches Shabbos, Elu shein mishum shvus le'yitchu es Shabbos. These, which is only a shvus, which involve only rabbinic decrees, not surely override the halachas of Shabbos for the sake of the Korban Pesach. Although carrying in a Rishus Harabim is usually also on Shabbos min Torah, carrying a living animal is only also min Rabbanon because we know that Chai Noisei es Atzmai, a living creature supports its own weight. By shifting around to balance itself, it lightens the load on the one carrying it. Because it is rule, carrying a living creature is not considered carrying midiraisa. Bringing an animal from outside the tchum is also only midrabanan, because the hilchos tchumen are all midrabanan. With regard to cutting off a wart, chatirasei abelas, The Mishnah refers to a person who does not use a knife, rather he moves the wart with his fingers or with his teeth, which is forbidden only midrabanon because of the unusual way to remove the wart. Rabbi Lezer Etzim holds that even hachanas that involve Issa Deraisa may be done on Shabbos for the Korban Pesach. But over here, he's trying to bring out a point, dafka, even for these things which may only be Issa Derabanan. Amalei Rabbi Shua said to him, Yom Tov Yechiach. Allah is a Yom Tov will show you that this is not a valid argument. Sheitir by Mishum Malacha. The Torah was matter preparing food in Yom Tov with malachas that involve a malacha l'raisa v'azur by Mishum Shvus. Yet at the same time, the Chachamim asked certain activities that involve rabbinic decrees, even for the sake of having food on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, a person is allowed to cook food which involves the malacha l'raisa. However, preparations for cooking that could have been done before Yom Tov are also even if they involve only Yisurim D'Rabbanan. So you see clearly the fact that the Yisurim D'Raisa may be lifted doesn't prove that Yisurim D'Rabbanan are also going to be lifted. Therefore, in regard to the Korban Pesach, just because the Malacha D'Raisa of Shechita is mutter, doesn't necessarily follow that the other Yisurim D'Rabbanan, such as carrying an animal out of the Tchum, or carrying an animal in a Rishus Harabim, or removing the Abelas, is also going to be mutter. Amalei Rabbi Lezer entered Rabbi Yeshua back. Mazi Yeshua. What proof is this, Yeshua? Marai Rishus L'Mitzvah. What proof can there be from an optional activity, which is eating on Yom Tov, to a mitzvah, which is a chiyuv, which has a sakaris involved? True, some activities involving Yisurim D'Rabbanan are also even for the sake of preparing food on Yom Tov. But that's because eating on Yom Tov is only an optional activity. This doesn't prove that such activities are also for the sake of bringing the Korban Pesach, which is a mitzvah. Heishav Rabbi Kiva v'Omar. Rabbi Kiva responded to Rabbi Lezer and he said, Hazot Chiach. We could bring a raya from the spritzing the mechatos of the paraduma water on a person who is tamei that will show that your argument is not valid. When a person needs hazo with mechatos and erev pesach shehi mitzvah, then the sprinkling is a mitzvah because it enables him to become tahar and bring a korban pesach. V'hi mishum shvus, and it involves only issa d'Rabbanan. And yet we wouldn't do it on Shabbos. This shows that we do not override a Issa D'Rabbanan even for the sake of a mitzvah. Therefore, you too should not be surprised that these preparations for the Korban Pesach, even though they involve a mitzvah and they're also only midrabanan, it will not override the halachas of Shabbos. Amalei Rabbi Lezer. So Rabbi Lezer said to Rabbi Kiva, "V'leo anidon." In regard to this very law that we're talking about of sprinkling the mechatas, I can make the same argument. According to me, my opinion, spritzing mechatas does override Hilchas Shabbos when needed in order to bring a Korban Pesach. Based on the same argument, I used to prove that all the other achanas for the Korban Pesach are Deiches Shabbos also. Just like this. Umayim shchita shim mishum malacha Deiches Shabbos. Just like shechita, shechting the Korban Pesach, which involves the Isser D'Raisa, Isser Malach D'Raisa on Shabbos, is Deiches Shabbos, Hazar Shem Shus, anything Deiches Shabbos, then is it not logical that spritzing the Mechatos, which involves only an Isser D'Rabbanan, should surely override the Hilchas Shabbos for the sake of the Korban Pesach? You can't disprove my argument from the law of Mechatos because I disagree with you regarding that very law. Meaning, Rabbi Lezer holds that that's going to be mutter on Shabbos also. Amalei Rabbi Kiva, so Rabbi Kiva says back to him, perhaps you should reverse the argument, and your svara should be like this: if shechting the mechatas, if sprinkling the mechatas, which involves only Issa D'Rabbanan, is not Deiches Shabbos, then is it not logical that shechting an animal which involves the Issa Malacha should not be Deiches Shabbos? Why do you use this argument to prove that doing Hazor is a mutter on Shabbos? It can just as well be used to prove that shechting is asur on Shabbos. Rabbi Kiva knew that his argument was faulty, as Rabbi Lezer will respond. Rabbi Kiva was merely trying to remind Rabbi Lezer that he himself once thought that sprinkling is asur on Shabbos. Amalei Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer said to him, Akiva, if you use this argument to prove that shechting the Korban Pesach is asur on Shabbos, you will have uprooted that which it says in the Torah, that you have to bring the Korban Pesach in its appointed time, from which we learned that the Korban Pesach is brought on the 14th of Nisan, bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos, whether it's a weekday or whether it's Shabbos. Since we have a clear tradition based on a pasuk that the Korban Pesach is shechted on Shabbos. So any argument to prove otherwise must be incorrect. We have a pasuk to back it up. The Torah uses the same word b'mayadai by the Korban Tamid as well. So the Chacham will learn from this that just as bringing the Tamid is Deicha Shabbos, so too the Korban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos as well. Amalei Rabbi Kiva said to Rabbi Lezer, Rebbe, haveli moed le'elu. My teacher, give me an appointed time in these preparations, which would be carrying through Rosh Hashanah or carrying it bringing it from out of the Tchum, or removing its yabelas, kamoed lashchita. Just as there's an appointed time for the shchita, then I'll allow these hachanos to be done on Shabbos. Only avodas or malachas that must be done at a designated time, like shechting the korban, which can be done only on Erev Pesach. That's what's Seicha Shabbos. But any other preparations, though, have no appointed time and can be done the day before. Therefore, it's not going to be Seicha Shabbos. And this is how the Mishnah ends off. And this is what we have to know, keep in mind, to simplify what we just spoke. Klalam Rebbe Kiva stated a rule. Kol malacha she'efshar la'asosam erev Shabbos. Any malacha that's needed for the Korban Pesach that's possible to do before Shabbos, Eina Deiches Shabbos does not override any Hilchas Shabbos. Shchita she'yefshar la'asosam erev Shabbos Deiches Shabbos. Shechting the korban, which is impossible to do before Shabbos, since it must be done dafka on erev Pesach, so then it will override the Hilchas Shabbos, and that's the bottom line. And that's really what Rebbe Lezer, Machlekes Rebbe Lezer and Rebbe Kiva as well, in Masechta Shabbos b'negea achona for Mila the same way. Mishnah Gimel. Emasai maybe chagiga imay. In addition to the Korban Pesach, another korban known as the chagiga was usually brought in Erev Pesach and eaten that night, along with the Korban Pesach. So when does a person bring the Korban chagiga together with the Korban Pesach? Bizman shehu ba b'choil. When the Korban Pesach is brought on a weekday. B'tara, and the Korban Pesach is brought b'tara, not by people who are tamei. As we'll mention soon, that the Korban Pesach can be brought b'tumah sometimes. Ubemuat, and it's too small for its meat to satisfy everyone in the group bringing it. A group may contain a lot of people, so that each of them receives only a small piece of meat from the korban. So in order to be yaitze the chiyuv of eating Korban Pesach, a person needs to eat only a piece of meat with the size of the kazayah. So ideally, eating the meat of the Pesach should bring a person to complete satisfaction. Therefore, when there's not enough meat from the Pesach to fully satisfy everyone in the group, they bring a chagiga together with it to provide extra meat, which they would eat first, so that they eat the Pesach. So when they eat the Pesach, they'll come fully satisfied. It was manshu b'Shabbos Shabbos. However, when the Korban Pesach is brought on Shabbos, b'meruba, or it's large enough to satisfy everyone in the group, ubetuma, or it's brought under the condition of tumah. Under ordinary circumstances, no korban may be brought or eaten by people who are tamei. However, there's a chidush that we have by Korban Pesach, that there's malkum to be able to bring the Korban Pesach b'tumah. So let's discuss this for a little bit. A special dispensation is made for the Korban Pesach in a case where most of the Yidden or most of the Kehanim were tamei meis. In that case, the Korban Pesach is brought and eaten even though the people are tamei. However, there's no such halacha made for the chagiga, and it may not be brought unless the owners and the Kehanim bringing it are also tahar, meaning there's no mokum to be makel to be able to bring a chagiga b'tumah. It was dafka a heter that we have by the Korban Pesach and not by anywhere else. So it was manshu b'Shabbos Shabbos b'meruba ubertumah ein mevini my chagiga. They do not bring a chagiga along with it. Although the Korban Pesach is brought on Shabbos and under certain conditions of tumah, the chagiga may not be brought on Shabbos or under any condition of tumah. It's also brought only when it's needed to ensure that everyone in the group is going to be completely satisfied from the Korban Pesach. That's b'meruba when you have enough. Mishnah Dalet. Chagiga haisabam and atzonim and abokar. The chagiga may be brought from small livestock or from cattle. Min hakvasim and min izim. From small livestock means from sheep or from goats. Min haschormim and anakevis may be brought from male or female animals. Min hachelos l'shnei yom v'layla echad. And it may be eaten for 2 days and 1 night after it's brought. It may be eaten if you bring it on the 14th day of Nisan. It may be eaten the day it's brought, and the following night, meaning the first night of Pesach, and the next day, which will be the first day of Yantiv. These are halachas that apply to every other Korban Shlamim as well, and therefore apply to the Chagiga, which is a Korban Shlamim. The Korban Pesach, however, must be a male, and may be eaten only that night. In addition, the Korban Pesach must be an animal less than a year old, while the chagiga, maybe an adult animal, doesn't have that age restriction as the Korban Pesach does. Zogt the Mishnah weiter, Mishnah Hey, Ha-Pesach sheshochto shaloi l'shmoi b'Shabbos chayav alav chata. So this was a discussion previously in Perek Hey, Mishnah Beis. We learned that a Korban Pesach that's shechted on Shabbos is only going to be good if we're shechted l'shma. So a person who shechts a Korban Pesach on Shabbos, l'shem a different carbon, chayav chatas. The shaychet must bring a chatas for this because he was mechal Shabbos. The Torah allows the mitzvah of shechita of the Korban Pesach to override the Isser of shechting animal on Shabbos. However, a Korban Pesach that was shechted not l'shem Pesach is no good. It's invalid. Therefore, its shechita does not fulfill the mitzvah of Pesach and will be a chilul Shabbos. Ushar kol azvachim sheshachtu l'shem Pesach em enen ruyin chayev ve'im ruyin hein Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas Rabbi Yeshua paiter. The Mishnah now discusses the halacha for a person who shechted another carbon in Erev Pesach when it fell out on Shabbos with the intention that they should be a Pesach offering. Ushar kol azvachim sheshachtu l'shem Pesach. In regard to all other offerings that a person shechted on Shabbos l'shem Pesach, the halacha is as follows: Im enen ruyin chayev. If they are the kind of animals that are not fit for a Korban Pesach, he must bring a chatos since he was mechal Shabbos. V'im ruyin hein. However, if they are animals that are fit for a Korban Pesach, Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatos. Rabbi Eliezer says he must bring a chatos. Rabbi Yeshua paiter. Yeshua exempts him from a chatos. Since the animal was the same type as the Korban Pesach, it's assumed that he shechted it by mistake, and in his hurry to bring the Korban Pesach, he forgot that it was a different carbon. According to Rabbi Yeshua, when a person is over an avera through a mistake made while he was trying to do a mitzvah, he's parted from chatos, and this is called toya b'dvar mitzvah, one who errs in the matter of a mitzvah. Rabbi Yeshua maintains that if while preoccupied in trying to do a mitzvah, a person errs and does a sin that would usually make him mechuyev chatos, he's parted from the chatos, provided that he accomplishes some sort of mitzvah along the way. Rabbi Eliezer said, "Ma'ama Pesach shu murta l'shmoi k'sheshina shmoi chayev." Now, in the case of Pesach, which one is permitted to shecht on Shabbos, l'shem Korban Pesach. Nevertheless, if a person changed it, he shechted it for another carbon, he must bring a carbon chatos because he was mechal Shabbos. Zvachim shenasurun l'shmon k'sheshina shmon and he didn't sheich chayev. Then, in the case of the other karbanos, which are forbidden to shecht on Shabbos, even l'shem that carbon, if a person changes their designation and shechts them not for their own sake, should he not surely have to bring a chatos? Because in essence, Rabbi Eliezer argues the following: a Korban Pesach may be shechted on Shabbos, yet a person who shechts it with their own kavanah is mechuyev chatos. So if a person shechts a korban that he was not permitted to shecht on Shabbos, he should definitely be mechuyev to bring a chatos, no matter what his kavanah was, because an improper intention should not make things better for him. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua loy. Rabbi Yeshua said to him, no, that's not a valid argument. Why not? Ima marta b'Pesach sheshino l'davar aser tamar b'zvachim sheshino l'davar amuter. For if you say that a person must bring a chatas for shechting Korban Pesach on Shabbos, not for its own sake, l'shem a different carbon, that's only because he intended to change it to something aser on Shabbos. That is, he shechted it for the l'shem, a regular carbon, which may not be shechted on Shabbos. So will you say the same for other karbanos, which he intended to change something mutter on Shabbos to a Korban Pesach? Since it's permitted to shecht the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, a person who shechts another carbon, l'shem Pesach, was toya b'dvar mitzvah. For this reason, he's parted from a chatas. No argument can be made from shechting a Korban Pesach shalei l'shma, because in that case he wasn't toya b'dvar mitzvah. So the only makom we're saying that he's parted is because he's parted from chatas is because he's toya b'dvar mitzvah. But if he's not toya b'dvar mitzvah, then he's not going to be potter. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer said to Yeshua, "Emurei tzibur yechichu." The halacha of a murei tzibur will prove that even a person who's toya b'dvar mitzvah must bring a chatas she'em utarin lishman. What are emurei tzibur? What are we talking about over here? Although the term emur usually refers to the parts that are burnt on the mizbeach, here it refers to communal karbonis, which the Torah said Omar to offer on Shabbos. Emurei tzibur yechichu. Karbanis ha'amurim betzibur b'Shabbos k'gein t'midin u'musafin yechichu she'mutarin l'sheichtan l'shmon v'ha'sheichet shar zvachim l'shmon b'Shabbos is going to be chayiv. So the halacha of communal karbanis will prove that even a person who's toya b'dvar mitzvah is mechuyev chatos she'mutarin l'shmon. For the karbanis tzibur, such as the korban tamid and the korban musaf, are allowed to be shechted on Shabbos l'shma. V'shechted l'shma chayiv. Nevertheless, a person who shechts a different carbon on Shabbos, for a person, let's say, brings a chatos and he shechted it l'shem, this carbon musaf. Nevertheless, a person who shechts a different carbon on Shabbos for the sake of one of these carbonos, of the emurei tzibur, he must bring a chatos even though he was tayyib b'dvar mitzvah. Clearly, a sin done while trying to do a mitzvah is not patur from a chatos. So you don't have tayyib b'dvar mitzvah in every case. Amlei Rishua said no. Im amrit be'emurei tzibur sheyesh lahem kitzvah tameh b'pesach she'en lo kitzvah. Rishua said to him, "Zish kein raya." That doesn't prove your argument. For if you say that a person must offer a chatas for the sin of bringing other karbanos, for the sake of karbanos tzibur, l'shem karbanos tzibur, that's only because the karban tzibur has a set amount, which means a limited number of karbanos tzibur are brought every Shabbos. And once those karbanos are shechted, everyone knows that there's no more than these karbanos that are going to be brought that day. If a person then shechts another carbon for l'shem, that karban tzibur, that's not an error, that's not tayyib b'dvar mitzvah, because everyone knows that it's a mistake. So it's not tayyib b'dvar mitzvah. It's not an error made while preoccupied with a mitzvah. It's simply an ordinary mistake. But what will you say? And can you say the same thing for the Korban Pesach, which has no kitzvah? Since a very great number of Karbonos Pesach are brought on Erev Pesach, and everyone is preoccupied with the Shechita and the Hakrava, so it's easy to make a mistake and shech a different carbon while trying to do a mitzvah. So it is very shaykh to become a tayyib b'dvar mitzvah. This is the end of the machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rishua. Both agreed, however, that a person who shechs any other carbon on Shabbos, l'shem a carbon tzibur, must bring a chatas. Reb Meir says, "Afa shechel l'shem emurei tzibur pater." Even a person who shechs other carbonos on Shabbos, l'shem carbon tzibur is pater, because even in such a case, he's still considered tayyib b'dvar mitzvah. Reb Meir extends this to even though people know exactly how many carbonos should be brought, Aval Pikain, Reb Meir extends it to the point where that even a person who brings a carbon and is marked l'shem karbanos tzibur on Shabbos, he's still considered tayyib b'dvar mitzvah. It's not considered like he didn't do anything. Okay, just interesting to mention that two mishnayos in this parak specifically are very big machlekes in Rabbi Eliezer and Rishua, Shakla v'Tarya, going back and forth a whole masa matan that we generally don't find. The whole back and forth in the mishnayos. I think that for the most part, when we do have a back and forth in the mishnayos, it does involve Rabbi Eliezer and Rishua, Rabbi Kiva. These are the main players. But it'd be interesting to see if there's more of an omek to this, because it goes back. I would assume that you can trace it back to the lumdus of what the machlekes is about and why they had to fight it out in the mishnayos alains also. Mishnah Vav. Shachta shalei la'ochel of shalei l'mnuyav. Besides shechting the carbon shalei l'shma, there are several other improper kavanas that can pass l'korban pesach, as we learned previously in Mishnah in Perek Hey Mishnah Gimel. This Mishnah tells us the halachas of a person who shechted a korban pesach on Shabbos with one of those intentions. Shachta shalei la'ochel shalei l'mnuyav on Shabbos. He shechted a korban pesach on Shabbos with the intention that it should be for those who are not able to eat it, or for those who are not registered for it, or for people who did not have a bris milah, or people that were tamei. Chayiv, he must bring a chatas because such a pesach is not valid, and he has therefore been mechal Shabbos by shechting it. La'ichlav shalai la'ichlav. However, if he shechted it for those who are able to eat it and for those who are not able to eat it, lemnuyav shalai lemnuyav, or for those registered for it and those that are not registered for it, Lemulin v'la'areilin, or for people who had a bris and people who didn't have a bris, l'taharim u'l'tameim, for tamei and tatar people, pater, he's pater from achatas, because in these cases the carbon pesach is valid, and its shchita overrides hilchas Shabbos. Shachta v'nimtza bal mum chayiv. If he shechted and found out to have a mum, he must bring a chatas, because it's takachil Shabbos. Shachta v'nimtza treifa b'seiser pater. However, if he shechted, it was found out to be a treifa from a hidden defect. He's parted from a chatas, even though the carbon is no good, since it was possible to discover this defect before the animal was shechted. The sin was unavoidable, and he's parted from a chatas. A person brings a chatas only when he does something unintentionally, which means that he didn't know, or he forgot that the act he was doing was osur. When a person sins ba'onis unavoidably, which means that due to circumstances beyond his control, he's going to be parted from a chatas. If a person shechts a carbon pesach that's later found out to have a mum or to be a treifa, He could have done nothing to prevent the avera. Says pater from mechatas. When the animal has a blemish outside its body, he could and should have checked it beforehand. Why did they have to tie the Korban Pesach to their bed 4 days before they brought it in Mitzrayim? Because they had to do bedika for 4 days to make sure it didn't have a mum. And all karbanos had to do bedika. All karbanos that were brought in the base had to do bedika 4 days to make sure it didn't have a mum. But over here, since there was no way to know, so then he's going to be pater. If he shechted the Korban Pesach and then found out that all the Bailim had withdrawn the registration from it before the Shechita, that the owners died or became Tameh before the Shechita, the carbon is therefore no good because it has no one to eat it. Pater Menesha Shachat Bershus. The Shechet is pater from Mechatas because he shechted it with Rishus. Since he didn't know that the carbon no longer had valid owners, the Avera was unavoidable and he is pater from Echatas.